Welcome to The Explainer. So thrilled to have you here today. If you've ever stared at a tiny speck crawling across your floor, or maybe noticed a mysterious little pile of sawdust near your baseboards and thought, what on earth is going on? Well, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're taking a highly structured, deep dive into what I like to call the rogues gallery of household pests. We're going to examine the very real structural and health-threatening invaders that might literally be hiding right under our noses. Grab your notepad because we are absolutely going full forensic pest detective today.
Here's our game plan. We'll be looking at 1. Health hazards like cockroaches. 2. The termite menace. 3. Termite factions. 4. Wood-boring beetles. And finally, 5. Carpenter ants.
Section 1. Health hazards, cockroaches. Okay, let's dive into this. We're starting with a pest that kind of needs no introduction but definitely deserves a much closer look. We almost always think of cockroaches as just, gross nuisances, but we really need to reframe them as major medical threats. Why does identifying and eliminating them matter so much? Well, because the stakes are incredibly high for human health. They aren't just scavenging for crumbs, they're active vectors for serious disease pathogens. We're talking the bacteria that cause food poisoning, dysentery, even wound and respiratory infections. But maybe the most alarming detail is their role as allergens. Cockroach cast skins and droppings are actually a leading asthma trigger among inner-city youth. So getting rid of them isn't just about keeping things clean, it is a critical medical necessity.
The absolute worst offender you're going to encounter indoors is the German cockroach, or Bladilla germanica. They're pretty small, only about ½ inch to 5/8 of an inch long, but man, their reproductive rate is staggering. A single egg case, the Utheca, holds 30 to 40 eggs, and they go from egg to reproducing adult in just 2 months. Naturally, they thrive indoors in warm, moist environments. Think kitchens and bathrooms. Now here is a fascinating, if slightly repulsive, biological detail. To survive early development in those dark crevices, the nymphs practice copaphagy. Yeah, that means they feed on the feces of the older cockroaches. Lovely, right? Oh, and one absolutely vital identification clue to remember. Unlike their look-alike, the Asian cockroach, German cockroaches do not fly.
Moving right along to Section 2, the termite menace. Let's pivot the explainer away from the moisture of the kitchen and head straight down to the foundation. We're now dealing with the ultimate structural destroyers of the world, termites. A massive part of pest forensics is simply not confusing the culprit. When a homeowner sees a swarm of insects, panic usually sets in, but you can be the calm voice of reason by knowing the definitive differences between an ant and a termite. First, check the antennae. Ants have distinctively elbowed antennae, while termites have straight, beaded ones. Next, look at the waistline. Ants have that pinched, narrow waist, whereas termites, they're thick and broad all the way down. Finally, if they happen to have wings, a flying ant has front wings that are noticeably longer than the hind wings, but a termite's wings are perfectly equal in size.
Termites cause billions in damage, but here's the totally wild part. They can't even digest the wood they eat on their own. Literally impossible for them. They are completely dependent on a microscopic ecosystem inside their gut. They rely on one-celled protozoans alongside specific bacteria and special enzymes just to break down the tough cellulose found in wood. But how do baby termites get this gut flora? Well, it's through a process called trophallaxis, which is essentially mouth-to-mouth or anus-to-mouth food and fluid sharing. Without this direct transfer from the older workers, the nymphs would literally starve to death while completely surrounded by wood.
Section 3. Termite factions. So, the crucial point is, not all termites behave the same way. Just like a military force has a navy, an army, and an air force, termites have different operational factions. Identifying their specific faction is the absolute key to stopping them. Enter the Formicine subterranean termite. This is a highly destructive species that builds massive colonies. We're talking often over 1 million individuals. If you're inspecting a colony, your ultimate forensic clue is the soldier cast. Look directly at the shape of the head. The Formicine soldier features a very distinct, teardrop-shaped head, compared to the more rectangular head of native subterranean termites. Finding that teardrop shape, that means you're dealing with a massive, highly aggressive infestation.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how the smallest detail provides a definitive ID when dealing with flying swarmers. If you find a discarded wing on a windowsill, put it right under a magnifying glass. By simply counting the heavy, dark veins along the leading edge of the wing, you can perfectly separate your factions. The subterranean termite wing has only 2 strong veins, but the drywood termite wing, it has 4 strong anterior veins. That one tiny detail tells you exactly what treatment strategy you need to use. And speaking of drywood termites, they're entirely unique because they require absolutely no ground contact. They get all the moisture they need directly from the wood itself. Because they're preserving moisture, the waste they leave behind is incredibly distinct. Their tiny fecal pellets are hard, dry, and feature a highly specific, six-sided concave shape. Even wilder, these pellets never change shape, size, or color over time. If you spot little piles of these six-sided pellets near a baseboard, you've got drywood termites in the framing for sure.
All right, on to Section 4, wood-boring beetles.
Termites aren't the only ones chewing up our homes, so let's transition to our next faction in the rogues gallery, the wood-boring beetles. Here, our focus shifts entirely to the forensic evidence they leave behind on the surface of the wood. When dealing with beetles, you often won't actually see the insect itself. You'll only see the exit hole where the adult emerged and the sawdust-like waste, which we call frass, pushing out of it. By measuring the exit hole size and checking the texture of the frass, you can confidently categorize the entire infestation. True powder post beetles leave tiny holes in silky fine frass in hardwoods. False powder post beetles, they leave slightly larger holes with coarse, packed frass. Anobiid beetles prefer high-moisture wood and leave elongated, loosely packed frass. Every single beetle leaves a signature.
If you do manage to capture the beetle, identification is incredibly straightforward, if you know what to look for. Sometimes, a completely harmless flower beetle is mistaken for a highly destructive true powder post beetle. The secret is the antennae. The destructive powder post beetle has a clear two-segment club at the end of its antenna and globular eyes. The standard flower beetle, on the other hand, has a three-segment club and eyes that wrap around the side of its head. Plus, you can't miss the massive hind legs, the coxae, on the powder post beetle, taking up a third of its entire body.
And this brilliantly illustrates the damage left by the old house borer. Now, the name is actually a bit of a misnomer because they actually prefer attacking softwoods that are less than 10 years old. The key here is the exit holes. Unlike the perfectly round holes left by the powder post beetles, the old house borer leaves behind larger, distinctively oval-shaped exit holes, about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch wide. When you see an oval hole in a newer pine stud, you know exactly who the culprit is.
Section 5. Carpenter ants. Let's move to our final wood-destroying pest to complete our structural invader profile before we test our knowledge, the carpenter ant. The most important distinction to make about carpenter ants is that they do not eat wood, they are excavators. They hollow out wood solely to build their nests. Because they don't eat it, they have to push the debris out, and here is your forensic clue. Their galleries are perfectly smooth, almost like they've been sanded down, with no mud tubes like you'd see with a termite. When they eject their frass out of a kick-out hole, it doesn't just look like sawdust. Look closely and you'll see it's littered with tiny insect fragments and empty pupal cases. It's basically a miniature graveyard mixed with wood shavings.
All right, let's move to our final exam and test what we've learned today. I want you to think back to the specific environmental requirements of our rogues gallery. Which of the termite species we discussed is most likely to be found thriving and attacking wood with moisture levels of less than 15%? Think about it for a second.
If you guessed the drywood termite or the powder post termite, you are absolutely correct. Remember, drywood and powder post termites are entirely unique in the termite world because they require zero ground contact. They can pull all the hydration they need from exceptionally dry timber, leaving behind those perfect six-sided fecal pellets we talked about earlier.
Let's do one final interactive question directly from our sources to really cement your understanding of how these destructive pests actually function biologically. Termites use which of the following to digest the cellulose found in wood? Is it bacteria, protozoa, enzymes, or all of the above?
The answer is all of the above. It takes a massive, microscopic village to process timber. It's the combination of all three, the protozoans, the bacteria, and the enzymes, that allows them to break down cellulose. And don't forget, they pass this crucial biological toolkit down through the colony via trophallaxis. It makes them some of the most efficient and, frankly, fascinating wood destroyers on the planet. As we wrap up this explainer, I hope you realize that the evidence is always in the details. From counting wing veins, to the shape of an insect's eye, to the exact geometry of a tiny fecal pallet, nature always leaves a signature. So I leave you with this. The next time you see a tiny pile of dust near a baseboard or a small insect crawling near your kitchen sink, will you know exactly who's hiding in your walls? Keep your eyes open and keep learning. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll catch you on the next deep dive.